Did you ever have to finish someone else's sentence? You know, like when your mom asks what you want for dinner, and you say something like, I don't know, ask Dad. He's the one always wanting to go to Taco Bell. And then she finishes your sentence by saying, we are not going to Taco Bell. Yeah, that's annoying. But at least that S, not as bad as having to figure out someone's name in a fairy tale. That's impossible. Well, good luck with that. Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. And today we're answering the what's in a name question for Rumpelstiltskin. Rumpelstiltskin, also sometimes called Rumpelstiltskin, a German fairy tale collected by the brothers Grimm in 1812. The story has been adapted and retold countless times, so there's no shortage of versions out there. For this video, I'll be drawing from the original Grimm version, as well as a couple of adaptations I really like. So let's get started. Once upon a time in a faraway land, there was a miller who had a daughter who was known for her beautiful spinning. One day the king hears about how great this girl's spinning is, and invites her to come over to the palace and spin some straw for him. You see, the king desperately wanted to make gold out of straw, but he just couldn't figure out how, so he hoped this girl would be able to do it. He invited her over to the palace and set her up in a room full of straw and said, hey, spin this into gold for me, and you'll win a prize. She tried, but of course she couldn't spin straw into gold. And as she sat there racking her brain, trying to figure it out, she heard a voice behind her say, don't worry, I'll do it for you. Startled, she turns around and sees a little man sitting in a chair. This little guy was about half a meter tall, dressed in green, and looked a lot like a goblin. He said he could spin the straw into gold for her if she gave him her firstborn child. Naturally, she didn't agree to that, so he spun the straw into gold all by himself and left. Then once the girl finished spinning her own pile of straw, the king came in, saw all the gold and assumed she must have done it, and took her back to the castle with him. At the castle, the king locks her up and waits for her baby to be born. He wants the kid before it gets too old, so he's willing to wait however long it takes. Meanwhile, the girl is freaking out because she doesn't want to give her kid to the weird little goblin man. She paces around her room and eventually drifts off to sleep, only to be woken up by the sound of bells. She looks out her window and sees this impish little fellow celebrating with a bunch of other goblins. He sees her looking and motions for her to come outside. Once she does, he tells her that her time is up and that she needs to give him the child. She begs for more time, but he says no. However, he does offer her a deal. If she can figure out his name, she can keep her child. He tells her she can ask anyone in her village and even search the whole world. But if she can't figure it out by nightfall, she still has to give him her firstborn. With that, he disappears and she goes back to her room to try to figure out his name. She spends the entire day thinking of every name she can possibly imagine, but none of them seem to fit. Just as she's about to give up, she thinks, wait a minute, does he have a last name? Could his last name be Miller? After all, he did show up at my dad's mill, and he looked kind of like a miller's son. She goes outside to check and finds the imp doing a little dance while waiting for her to come back. She asks, are you the miller's son? And he says, you got me. How did you figure it out? She says, well, you kinda gave it away when you asked me to go to my father's mill. He warns her not to trick him again, and tells her he's gone, take a nap until it's time for her to give him the baby. She says okay, and he runs off to go take a nap. She watches him go, and realizes he probably wasn't even telling the truth about her needing to give him her firstborn. He probably just made that up to try to trick her. So he might have actually just been trying to see if she would call him the miller's son, or maybe he thought she'd decall him Rumpelstiltskin. Yeah, that sounds more likely. So that's what she calls him. He runs over and asks, did you find out my name? And she says, yeah, I think you're Rumpelstiltskin. He freaks out and starts running around the room, screaming, no, 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 she knows my name. Now she'll never give me up. He eventually calms down and angrily tells her that she cheated. But despite the fact that he didn't want her to win, technically speaking, she did figure out his name. So she wins the prize, and gets to keep her child. He throws a massive tantrum and stomps off. Now that he's lost the bet, she and her baby are safe. So she goes back home. A year later, she and her husband are celebrating their anniversary. They're reminiscing about how hard things were when they first got married, and how they never could have guessed their lives would turn out the way they did. Suddenly, Rumpelstiltskin pops out of nowhere and says, oh, you two look so happy. Why don't I crash the party and ruin everything? And then he reveals that he hasn't given up on getting that baby yet. He gives them two options. They can either give him the child, or the wife will have to spin straw into gold for the rest of her life. Of course, they don't agree to either of those options. And just as Rumpelstiltskin is about to take the baby, the wife calls him a Rumpelstiltskin. He stops dead in his tracks, knowing he's been bested once again. He grumbles and mutters about how she only won because she cheated last time, but it doesn't matter because now he officially knows his name. So she won fair and square. He gives them one last angry look and disappears. And that's the end of our story. Well, that was a wild ride. Thanks for watching. And now, here's a fun little writing exercise inspired by this week's story. Have you ever been in a situation where you accidentally finished somebody else's sentence? What was it? For those of you who are interested, there's a fun book that collects all of the Grimm fairy tales. Since there's so many stories in the collection, the art changes from book to book, which means you'll find different artists taking on these classic tales. This copy has really beautiful illustrations by This is such a cool picture book, and it is definitely an upgraded edition of the Grimm fairy tales. As you can probably tell, I love reading fairy tales, so it's always fun to come across a new version of one I haven't heard before. My favorite part of this book is that along with the story, there's a section discussing the history of the story and how it compares to other versions. This story also contains the juniper tree and the robber bridegroom, two stories I had never heard of before. If you enjoy these videos, please consider supporting my content. It's free and it really helps out. Now I need to ask you guys for a favor. Ever since YouTube changed how they rank videos on their platform, it's become increasingly difficult for people to find my content unless they already know about the channel. If you feel like my videos helped you learn more about fairy tales, do me a favor and hit the subscribe button. Even if you don't feel like subscribing, I ask you to at least click the bell icon so that you get notified whenever I upload a new video. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.